All episodes of House of the Dragon are now available. They're now streaming on HBO Max or wherever you get your HBO shows in the world. This has been going on for 10 weeks now. It's crazy. When this show first started, I was in a different country. Now I'm in a different country. So much has happened since then. House of the Dragon takes place about 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones, so this is before the time of Daenerys Targaryen, but you do follow the Targaryen family at the height of their power and essentially thriving as a family dynasty. Everything seems to be going great, but the show is about the eventual crumbling apart of the family, eventually things that led to it being desecrated, the wars and the conflicts that commenced, the rivalries that formed, and since this is just season 1, you're seeing the sort of origin of those things and the things that eventually do lead into the catastrophes that will follow. This was a skeptical show probably for many to return to because, as you know, Game of Thrones didn't end exactly in the best way for a lot of people, and it's got a series finale that has soured a lot more for over, the last few years. But House of the Dragon is a prequel, and it's interesting because there are so many stories that you can tell in the world of Game of Thrones, and so naturally there is also some excitement to that, like, oh, what else can you do? And so going back to it was also quite enticing. And having now seen the entire season and having talked about a chunk of it in YouTube Shorts, which you can always check out on my channel, I really liked season 1 of House of the Dragon. I have my issues with it. There's one thing in particular that I feel is a universal issue. I'll go into that a little bit later. But aside from some things here and there, I think this was a damn good season that at times rivaled most of Game of Thrones. There are seasons of Game of Thrones that I didn't like as much as I liked this first season of House of the Dragon. And a lot of that has to do with the way it's being run and the way it's been entirely crafted, especially when it comes to the characters and the relationships between them. Because you have to sort of track that deterioration. And I think the show understands how to make it happen and essentially takes what is, like Game of Thrones used to do, a soap opera and turn it into something more intense that everybody is glued to. And so you get this very intense family drama with many episodes that are just rooted in dialogue, going back to the days of like early Game of Thrones. And I think it excels in those moments the most. I mean, the show itself is visually spectacular. This is the second most expensive show ever, right behind Lord of the Rings of Power. That was 30 million. This is about under 20 million per episode. And there are scenes in this where you can really tell the production is spectacular. There are some where you cannot, and we'll talk more about that later, but I was very pleased with the craft on display. But let's talk about these performances, because you get so many great ones, such as Paddy Considine as Viserys Targaryen, who is a king just trying to make sure things don't go to absolute shit. And you feel for this guy so much as the episodes progress, and his health deteriorates, but he's seeing his family come apart, and all he wants is for them to be harmonious. And so the conversations that he's having and the interactions that he's having, they just get worse and worse because he's like, I don't understand why you guys are fighting so much. I just want there to be some happiness. And so it feels really, really tragic as things progress when things just continue to get worse, but he's getting older, so he doesn't have that kind of power to be able to take it on anymore like he probably would have if he were a younger man. And it's heartbreaking to watch his performance, but he is giving a career best performance over here. I've seen him for years in comedies, but this is beyond any of that. Matt Smith as his brother Daemon was also really great. This really sleazy jag-off of a character. And eventually, as it progresses, there are more characters who are worse at times. And then you're like, oh yeah, it's Game of Thrones. There's obviously going to be worse characters. But it doesn't change the fact that this guy, like, he's ruthless and very cunning. And I think Smith plays him really, really well. I'm just glad to see Matt Smith in a good franchise thing. Like, I mean, Morbius was not exactly the highest note, so I'm just glad that he's in something. I do want to give a very special section to Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower. So as the episodes progress, there are time jumps. So the first half of the season, Rhaenyra is played by Millie Alcock, and then you've got Alicent played by Emily Carey. And then in the next 5 episodes, you get Emma Darcy, who plays Rhaenyra, adult version of Rhaenyra, and you get Olivia Cooke as the adult Alicent. These 4 actors are magnificent, especially the younger ones. With those first 5 episodes are resting on them to the point that it became somewhat of a concern that they weren't going to be in the next few episodes. They were like, how do you follow this up? Like, how is Emma Darcy supposed to be better than Millie Alcock over here, or vice versa with, Olivia Cooke? But I have to tell you, like, everybody is bringing their A+ game here and then some. They're all giving performances worthy of Emmy nominations. I think every single one of them brings so much humanity and so much tragedy to each character, and also this very shrewd sense to it, depending on the moment calling for that. And so each character goes through these different variations of, like, being someone who wants to be doing the right thing, but also is like, personal gain, I want that. Especially when it comes to characters like Alicent. She's trying to come out on top somehow, but she's also willing to do things later on as the season progresses that, as her adult version, is just like, okay, you know what? I've been on the sidelines enough. It's time to dismantle some shit. I heard some people say that apparently she gets worse than Cersei at one point. I have to read Fire and Blood. My apologies. But that should be interesting. But what you get with Rhaenyra is incredibly tragic as well. She's promised the Iron Throne. And so when that happens, you're obviously like watching this sort of progression of how she's eventually going to get to that point. But as the episodes progress, you see this doubt forming and these other things coming up in the middle, other aspects like, there's another son now, and suddenly Viserys is married to Alicent, and it's like, oh, but now their son has a claim to the throne. So like, what happens? And suddenly there's rifts happening, but it's handled so well, and young Rhaenyra is wonderfully done. But then the older version of Rhaenyra, Emma Darcy, they did such a great job of like taking the character forward, and then Rhaenyra's anguish and sort of the turmoils that she's going through, I think Darcy captured that fantastically. Like, this is a tremendous performance. And like I said, I wanted to devote an entire section just to talking about these two. Both of them are so great. Olivia Cooke is giving one of the best performances of her career as Alicent, an older Alicent. And, really, really great stuff. However, this does lead into something that I did have an issue with, which was the time jumps. There's a lot of them. And I wish that season took its time getting to certain things. Like, there's a 10-year gap between episode 5 and 6. And I thought, okay, this is obviously the age difference and the actor changes, but you also have to kind of take a step back and say, well, shouldn't we spend more time with the younger versions first, going over what's happening? Because, I mean, it's a very weird thing to suggest that between episode 5 and 6, those 10 years, nothing really happened. So they were just like, let's move on. I kind of want to do an entire season with, the younger versions of those characters and sort of tracking it a little bit better. Maybe that's just me though, but I feel like this is a problem that's come up with a lot of people. It's not about the performances in general. It's not like, oh, she was going to be better or they're going to be better. It's more about, I think people just wanted to see the story take its time. And while it's not like a rush thing, it's not like Game of Thrones episodes, like the last few episodes, it's not like that at all. It's just a case of, you could have taken a little more time. The production is something that I thought was immaculate, but there is one thing that I did talk about. I mentioned that was a little off. I think it's episode 7 where they're at Lena's funeral or something like that. And at night, you get a scene where Rhaenyra is talking to Daemon. And that scene is taking place at night, and for some reason, I guess that day on set, they ran out of lighting budget because it's incredibly dark and you can't really see anything. And I had a Dolby Vision, like 4K screen. I couldn't see anything. Like there's something up over there. And the weird thing is, when you watch that scene and then you look at the behind the scenes screenshot of it, it's bright day. So I'm not really sure why they decided to tamper with it. I guess it's because it follows up with this scene of a dragon flight. So sure, I guess you wanted to create something a little epic there for a moment. But I would have liked to see the dragon flight thing too. That scene was spectacular. It was just something that kind of bugged me in that moment, but the rest of it was fine. Really, my biggest issue just came down to, pace yourself out. You can take your time. It's all good. As far as everything else goes, I think the storytelling is on point, really. The episodes progress still fairly solidly. The season finale was just aired, which I'm gonna give you guys like some spoilers for episodes 9 and 10 right now. So spoiler warning in case you haven't seen the season finale yet. All the stuff that happens in 9 after Viserys' death, and then Alicent sort of swooping in and being like, oh, he said Aegon was going to be the next king. And I'm like, no, see, your biggest mistake, should have named these two kids the same. He was talking about Rhaenyra's son, not yours. And then this whole usurping that happens, and then you have Aegon, her son, who is instated as king. But then that doesn't bode over super well for everybody. And then eventually in the dragon pit where the coronation happens, you have Princess Rhaenys, who just sort of comes out on her dragon and just like wreaks some havoc for a little bit. She could have burned the whole place down. The whole show would have ended right there. But at the same time, it's like, it's not my war to fight. I understand. But then episode 10, I thought builds very strongly on that, in that you have Rhaenyra trying to sort of follow in her father's footsteps of why should we go to war? Let's try and do this peacefully. We don't need to create a scenario where, we have this entire thing going to hell. But at the same time, it's like, how far can you get with that? Because there's going to be a slip up. Someone's going to make a mistake or something's going to happen, and then you're going to be in some trouble. And in the end of episode 10, you have this How to Train Your Dragon like sequence with a fight, which does not end like How to Train Your Dragon. But I swear to God, when I saw that kid try to get on his dragon and he doesn't see that big ass Vhagar in the distance, right then I was like, that kid is fucked. He is not making it to the end of this episode. And it was our own fault, if anyone who got sort of, attached to the characters. The thing is, Game of Thrones rule 101. Never get attached to characters. You never know who's gonna die. And so, if you were upset about that, it's at this point it kind of feels like that was our mistake. We should not have done that. But the death of the Viserys is incredibly crazy because that's the war signal. And so that episode ending was genuinely like, oh shit. But Rhaenyra's final look, where she's sort of like looking towards, now it's war, but so towards the camera, it's like, oh, 2 years now we're gonna have to wait after that final shot. But it's not going to end well for some characters, that's for sure. At the end of the day, however, I was very pleased with House of the Dragon. My few flaws aside here and there, I had a really great time with it. Some dialogue could have been better in a few places, for sure. There were some things that I feel like could have been definitely, layered out a little bit more. But overall, I'm very happy with it. I'm excited to see season 2 whenever it comes out. And I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. I'm gonna give House of the Dragon season 1 an A-. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. As always, if you like this, please do subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the movies.